Greetings, traveler. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for the past 10 years, and today what I want to share with you is a little hack I found to make implementing features in your game become 10 times faster. So let's dive in. You might have noticed in your own work experience or heard from others that developing a feature can be quite time consuming. It can take, let's say, up to 2 months to implement just a simple feature like jump on a character, or maybe a new weapon type, or just a new mechanic to use in your game. Today, I want to talk about how this process can take much less to make and become way more efficient. And to understand that, first let's take a look at hard mode and why this is so time consuming to make. So what I have here is broken down the development of this feature into 8 weeks and included the people that are typically involved in the creation of a feature. Of course, if you want to create your own feature, this might look very different. So this is just a sample to get some working understanding on this. So typically you have a game designer who comes up with the concept and the design document of what to make, what the feature is going to be like. Then the engineer is going to be implementing all these features in the game, all these aspects of the feature. The artist will be making the visuals, and finally there is someone from QA who will be taking a look at the game design document to make sure that they know what to test for later on, and to make sure that the implementation is as intended by the game designer. So when this development starts, here I have in light blue or green the work that actually takes place on this feature by this person. And then in olive green, there is other work that takes place in the meantime, while a different member of the team is working on the same feature. So how this actually plays out is, let's say in this sample feature, the game designer starts by putting together the document and then says that the work is done there and the engineer is ready to start his work on the game feature. Now, because the engineer is involved in other work when this request happens, it actually takes some time, most of the times, to get into the work for this game feature for the engineer. And then a couple of weeks later, when the engineer's work is done, perhaps the artist can then go in and create the art necessary now that all the hooks and all the setup is ready for the art to be implemented in the game. And then the QA usually will go and check everything. Perhaps there is some issues, perhaps there is some adjustments that need to be made. So the feature goes back to the engineer for adjustments. Perhaps it goes again next week back to the artist for even more adjustment. And then yet another week later, the game designer and the engineer perhaps need to collaborate on something to complete this feature. Now, this looks very normal. In fact, most companies that I know of work in this cycle. However, the great delay here comes from the fact that all this work is scattered around. And as many developers might have experienced, when you have to do a context switch, when you have to switch from working on one feature to working on something else, that takes a lot of mental energy to make the switch. So jumping from one feature to the other during your workday or your work week is very time consuming and very stressful. So when you're going from one feature to this game feature and back to other work, you're actually wasting a lot of time that could be used much more efficiently. How is that possible? Well, let's have a look. The easy way of doing this would be to instead, and my proposal for this and what I've used in the past with great success, is to consolidate this team of 4 people in this case into a devoted development team. And that means that when these 4 people are working on this game feature, they do not undertake any other work, at least not with any priority. So instead of having the work happen over several weeks, instead it can be compressed into a much shorter time frame. And in fact, the same amount of work can be executed within the same week, simply because the team is available to support each other and provide all the input that's necessary to complete the feature. So realistically, how this would play out is, again, at the beginning, the game designer will complete the document, and of course the game designer has a runway before this process starts to get the bulk of the work done. So any last adjustments that need to be done can be completed on the same day and shared with the engineer. Of course, it can be shared with QA and artists at the same time, but let's keep it simple and say just the game designer and the engineer talk about the feature and explain to the engineer what needs to be done. Then from the same day already, the engineer can start working, and you'll notice that the QA person here as well is involved in the process to understand the game feature. So very quickly, essentially the whole team is on board with what this feature involves. The artist is not active on this day, although it is very beneficial to join this conversation and understand what the feature is going to be about. On the next day, the engineer continues the work, and perhaps on yet the next day, Wednesday, the feature is ready enough to be able to receive the art from the artist and have what's already there be checked by the game designer. Now, on the following day, the remaining part of the coding work is executed by the engineer, as well as the remaining art by the artist. The QA there can already follow the progress and see if the bulk of the work is done. Of course, at this point, there is likely to be some features and some small details missed. So on the final day, the game designer, more actively than any other day perhaps, checks the game, makes sure that everything is according to the document. The engineer does the necessary adjustments. The artist is available to provide any support necessary, and the QA person will likely playtest the game together with the game designer and follow it through to completion. Now, why is this framework possible? This framework is possible because at this time, the members are not undertaking any other work, and they do not have to do a context switch. When a member here is not actively working on the game, they are performing support tasks, which essentially means providing information to the other team members in this group about their work and how they want to shape the development of this. So for example, if on Monday when the engineer starts their work, they have a question about the game design, or maybe this question needs to become a meeting or is a more in-depth inquiry, the game designer is available to answer to the engineer. There is no other task that is happening at the same time to prevent this conversation from happening. And at the same time, the artist is also available to join this conversation and do any preparation tasks necessary to be ready to do his work when the time comes for the art to be put in the game. The QA person is in a similar situation. Sometimes maybe there is work to be done on the same day, but others there is a nice space here to think ahead about the work that needs to be done and to answer any questions the other members have. Doing this has a dramatic effect on the speed with which the game is completed or the game feature is completed. Instead of having to split the attention of the team into all these different tasks that are to be undertaken at the same time and confusing development with many topics at the same time, many features that are being developed, scattering everyone's attention all over the place, essentially, we focus this team's attention into just one thing, and they are all available and capable of working on this one feature to complete it as quickly as possible. So this way, members are not stressed. They are not having to undertake many features at the same time. They do not have to worry about multiple timelines and multiple deadlines approaching the horizon. They just have one thing to work on, and they can work on it with 100% of their capacity until it is completed, which is going to be very soon in this framework. So this is a very simple way of doing it. So let's look at some challenges that might arise from trying to use this feature or this development paradigm, I suppose. One of the challenges that might rise up if you try to do this, and it certainly did rise up for me when I attempted it for the first times, is that my organization doesn't support this. What this means is that the organization basically has been so ingrained into this process that whenever somebody says, let's make something new, this is the assumption of how it's going to happen. A ticket is going to be created for each feature that is to be implemented. Tickets are going to be distributed over several members, and people will start working this checkerboard style of development, which, as we said, takes a really, really long time to complete. So another problem is that people are too busy. They cannot afford to book a team just for this development cycle. And by this, we refer to this time frame. So all these different members, they all have their own tasks, so they are not available to be booked for an entire week to work on just one feature. And this again comes from this mindset where everybody has multiple things on their plate at any given time for perpetuity. Finally, we have the challenge of people wasting too much time and money sorry, when not working actively. And this refers to this state where, let's say, the engineer is busy all week except for Wednesday. And on Wednesday, the engineer is not actively working on something. This might seem like a waste of time to managers or to people observing this situation. So we're also going to have a look at what we can do for tackling this challenge. But let's start with the first one. So my organization doesn't support this type of working. Well, in my experience, I was in the same situation when I used it for the first time, and my manager at the time said that it's not possible to do this kind of development, and it would be too wasteful to book the entire team for a week and so on. So after showing essentially what I just showed to you now in a presentation, I said, well, let's pick a little feature that's very easy to complete and it wouldn't take much time to do anyway, and let's do a trial run with this. So after discussing this and after getting the buy-in of my manager, we managed to find an appropriate feature to do a trial run. And of course, since the whole team was available to focus their attention and work on this feature with all their concentration, the feature was completed extremely quickly, and the whole team was on point, ready, not stressed, not overloaded with $1,000 tasks, and ready to undertake the next task in a similar way. Of course, you can see how this was easily adopted by the team, and little by little, our core of 4 people started undertaking tasks like this. And this very fast development grew to the rest of the company because other teams would look at us and say, well, they are very fast with their development, so what are they doing different, and why can't we do what they're doing? So it was easy to convince others of the merit of this method simply based on our results. The other challenge that we discussed was that since everyone is busy with many tasks, they couldn't possibly be booked for an entire week to work on one feature. Again, the solution is to do a trial run with this. So perhaps a very small feature wouldn't require a week from everyone involved. Perhaps it only requires 3 days or 2 days, but still having everyone available and responsive during this process will supercharge the speed with which you complete this, and the results alone should be able to sell what you're offering with this method. And finally, there's a challenge of people seeing this, complaining that, well, if you book someone for a whole week, how do we know they're busy? Isn't it better to go back to the old paradigm where one person is tackling 5 to 10 tickets or tasks at a time? That is more time efficient, it's a better use of our money, and so on. Well, hopefully this chart here proves the same point. In hard mode and in easy mode, as I describe it here, it is the same feature being developed. You get the same thing at the end of the day. The question is, do you want to get the same feature at the end of 2 months, or even more, 2.5 months, I suppose, if you put the weekends in? Or do you want the same work to be delivered with just 1 week of work, and you don't even have to worry about the weekend. The speed of this execution is the biggest advantage of this approach. However, there's a couple of other things we can do when members are not active. So instead of describing the time of members being supportive as not being active, they can be described as doing these two things here. First, members who are not actively developing or actively creating documents or doing tests and so on, creating art, they are responsive and they are available to respond to any questions the other members have. This is a huge benefit because typically to answer a question about art, then a meeting would have to be set, and since everyone is busy, the meeting would be 1 or 2 weeks away, and then multiple people would have to participate in the meeting, perhaps the art manager, perhaps the game director. They are even busier than normal team members, so it's easy to see how this meeting would be a can that's just kicked down the road, and it would just delay not just this feature, but the whole project. So having the benefit of being responsive when asked about the game feature and details and implementation questions is a huge time saver. And that alone is worth being on standby, let's say, or being support to the other team members. The other major thing you can do while you are in this support mode is creating and updating documents. So even for game designers, just because you completed the first version of the game design document, that doesn't mean you managed to think of all possible cases and of all possible uses for your feature. And likely through development and through interaction with other people and particularly QA members, you will become aware of things that perhaps weren't obvious when you were creating the document. So this is an excellent time for you to review the document, update it with the feedback from the development team, and make sure that what you have in the project Confluence or wiki or whatever space you have to consolidate your work and have it available to everyone is up to date, which is very often a big problem when it comes to documentation for projects. So that is for game designers. Let's look at the other team members as well and see what they can do with their support time. For engineers, that is an excellent time to create documentation for their code. Again, a big complaint that comes with all engineering work, all coding work that happens in a game is that the code is a big black box and nobody knows what it does except for the person who created it. And even the person who created it, after some time has passed, doesn't know what his code did originally. So if you have here this, let's say, empty time in between where you're just answering questions and participating in meetings with this team, that is perhaps a good time to create the code documentation and make sure that your code is understandable by other people who will look at it in the future, including yourself. For artists, something that often comes up is, other than small adjustments that you can do to your work and perhaps working on little tools to improve your workload and the way you create art, is to work to append your assets to the asset library that the company maintains for future use. So if you're not familiar with this, sometimes companies, because they create so many assets in the process of making one game or multiple games, it is beneficial to put all the assets in a library and tag them appropriately. So when sometime in the future a need comes for an asset that's already created, the asset doesn't have to be made from scratch, and it can be instead taken from this library. So appending assets in this library is usually a very time-consuming thing, and somebody who has to do this work for the entire company can easily get overwhelmed. But if artists have to append their own work into the library, then they have all the information necessary to tag it appropriately and make sure it's useful for future use and for future members in this team. And finally, in their support time, QA can create the test cases necessary for this feature and also think of additional tests to do outside of the rigid professional QA work that's necessary. This means that QA can sit down, actually play the game for fun, or try to do things with this feature that are completely outside of the scope of the feature itself, and just try to be creative and see what's something outside of the standard test that players might do that perhaps the test itself didn't include in the beginning. And then creating the sheets for all these test cases and reporting the results back to the game designer or back to the other members during their own support time is something that is hugely valuable in this process, since any flaw the game has, any bug, any overpowered or underpowered feature is 100% certain to come back and bite you when the game gets released and when the general public has access to it. So catching all these things early, needless to say, is crazy valuable and important. So doing this at a time when QA has some time to themselves to relax and focus on this is, of course, extremely helpful to the project. So that's it for this little hack when it comes to development. I hope this helps you. I hope this will inspire you to try different things in your own development process in the future. And if you are interested in this kind of topic and you want to know more development related advice and tips, or if you have questions, please let me know down below and I'll do my best to answer. I hope this was interesting to you, and as always, have fun.